In this video, I'm going to show you how to make this book cake. Hi, it's Karolyn. If you want to learn how to bake and decorate amazing cakes, then I would love for you to join me by hitting subscribe and the bell. If you want to skip the intro and get right into the video, there are chapters linked below. So I'm going to show you how to make this book cake, and in order to do this, you have to start with a sheet cake. Now, she only needed 15 servings, so I started with a quarter sheet cake. And if you know me, you know I don't like to make sheet cakes or square cakes because I hate getting those stupid, stinking sharp edges. But we're covering this with fondant, so it's a lot, it's forgiving. So it doesn't have to be perfect underneath the fondant, and I will show you. So I decided to film this after I baked the cake. So unfortunately, I don't have a video showing you how to make a sheet cake. However, I make it the same way that I make a 12-inch cake, and I'm going to link that video in the description for you. And what I do, I put nails in the pan and I wrap the outside with a wet towel so it can evenly rise and not have the edges bake faster than the center. So that's all explained in that video. And this is baked in a 2-inch high quarter sheet pan, and I use my marble cake recipe, and that recipe will be linked in the video. Why can't I talk? That recipe will be linked in the description as well. And just a reminder, any of the tools that I use and any other videos that I reference, everything will be linked in the description. People always ask me, where'd you get that tool? Where'd you get this? Everything is linked below. I take the time to find it for you and link it below so you can easily find it. So let's get started. All right, so here is my quarter sheet cake that I wrapped and put in the freezer overnight. And you could see the holes from the 2 nails that I put in the pan when I baked it. And I will link that video below again on how I bake big cakes so you can see how I did that. I'm just going to unwrap the plastic from this cake, and to get it to not to stick to the top, I'm going to gently flip it over and then peel the plastic back. Don't just lift it up or the top will lift up with it. So just peel it back carefully and there is the cake. So now I like to take my scissors and trim off the excess. This is just something that I do. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, but it makes it easier to cut with this leveler. So I'm just taking this leveler and putting it to the correct height that I want and leveling off the top of that. And you can save this extra cake for cake pops or whatnot. Now I have some simple syrup. I have a video showing you how I make this. I will link it below, and I have a little paper towel to catch any overspray, and I'm spraying the cake with the simple syrup, and I'm taking a serrated knife and I'm cutting the cake exactly in half. Okay, now I'm getting a little bit of icing down on the cake board, and I'm lifting one side and putting that down. I want this to be on an angle on the board. Good, now I have a icing bag just with a coupler on it. There's no tip on it, and that's some stiffened American buttercream, and I'm piping a little dam there. And then I have some chocolate ganache. I have a video showing you how I make that, and I will link that below. And I'm just pouring that in there and then using my spatula to press it over to the edges. Good, now let's take the other piece of cake and stick that on top and make sure it's even. And I'm spraying the top with the simple syrup. Let's rewrap that in the plastic that was wrapped in it before, making sure that I get all the way down to the bottom. There's no cake exposed. And let's set that aside for a couple hours to settle. And now we want to crumb coat the cake, so let's take that plastic off. And I have a big batch of American buttercream, and I have a video showing you how I make that. I will link that below. And I'm starting at the bottom and just pressing this icing on the cake just so no air bubbles form underneath. And I'm doing an entire layer around the bottom of the cake. And once I get that done, I'm going to do a layer on the top of the cake. And when I do the top layer, you want to make sure that it's coming over the top of the cake so we can level it off. And then I'm filling in the top as well. And this is a crumb coat. It doesn't have to be perfect. So I'm dipping my spatula in some hot water to heat up the metal. Take a paper towel, wipe it off, make sure you're holding it straight so it's not on an angle. And I'm just quickly removing any excess icing just to get this crumb coat on here. So I'm pushing the excess back, and it's not going to look perfect, and that's okay. We're going to stick that back in the fridge for a couple hours. It was probably like 4 hours, and now look, the icing is solid, and now I can put on the final coat of buttercream. So again, I'm starting with the layer around the bottom part of the cake, and when I get to the corners, I just kind of wrap it around the corner. Good, and then I'm filling in the top. And then I'm going to do that top layer and make sure again that it's sticking up over the top of the cake so we can level it off. Now I'm dipping that in the hot water to heat up the metal, wipe it off so it's not wet, and I am carefully trying to keep that straight and removing that excess icing, and I'm going to keep dipping that in here. You're not going to see me do it every time, but every time I wipe the icing off, I'm going to re-warm that blade up. And you see how I'm starting on one corner and pressing back. I don't go all the way to the back, and then I start on that same corner and press back on the other side. So I'm trying to get pretty sharp corners, although this is going to be covered in fondant, so it doesn't have to be perfect. But this is just my method of icing cakes with corners, which takes forever. It can be a little bit of a pain in the butt. And now I'm just bringing the icing around the edge. So I'm just trying to keep it as straight as possible. There was a little bit too much icing around the top of the cake, so I'm just removing that. And now I'm taking a Viva paper towel. Now this is American buttercream. You can't do this with a meringue buttercream. It has to be American buttercream or a crusting buttercream. This Viva paper towel does not have a pattern on it, so the pattern won't transfer onto the cake. And do you see how I'm doing half of the paper towel on one side and wrapping it around and doing half the paper towel on the other side? And I'm just smoothing it down there with the fondant smoother. And I have videos where I talk about my process of icing cakes, and I will link that in the description. Now I'm taking my spatula and I'm holding it perfectly level and pressing it back. So I want this top part to be level, right? So I'm lining that back part up with the line that I previously made, and the front part is pushing that excess icing back. And again, this is covered in my video on how to ice a smooth buttercream cake. Now I'm refining this again with that Viva paper towel, again doing the half on one corner and half and wrapping it around and doing the half on the other side. And now I just want to take my spatula and refine that top edge so it looks perfectly level. And I want to smooth that top edge, so I'm just dipping that. I'm scooping out a little bit of that hot water and dripping it on the top and wiping it just to smooth out that buttercream on the top. So I do the center part, and then I start from the edges and push that water in. And again, this is covered in that video on how I ice cakes. Let's stick that back in the fridge. Now I have some black marshmallow fondant and I'm kneading it out here, and it is horrible. Look at that. You can't cover a cake with that. You got to work with it. So I'm going to sprinkle down some cornstarch, and I have some Tylose. Let me get a measuring spoon because you guys get so mad when I don't use a measuring spoon. So that was 1 teaspoon and I used about half of it. So it was a half teaspoon of Tylose powder, and I just kneaded that together and sprinkled down some cornstarch. Let that sit for 20 minutes. It's got to sit for it to have time to work. Don't use it right away. Now I have a little less white marshmallow fondant, and I have like a 1/4 teaspoon of Tylose powder, and I'm just going to knead that together. And again, you got to let it sit and start to work its magic before you start to use it. Now, you see how that's a little rounded? It's not a perfectly straight angle. So I'm dipping my knife under hot water, and I am just cutting this excess buttercream off. So this cake just came out of the refrigerator. The icing is solid, and I can get a much sharper edge. So I just keep running that knife under the water. You don't see me doing that, but I'm just trying to get the edges a little more square, or like on a right angle, rather than having any curves to it. It's me being a little extra, but that's okay. And now I need to measure the 3 sides. So this is where the pages are going to go. So it's about 4 inches high. And then I'm starting on one edge, wrapping it around and just going around the 3 edges. And that was about, what, 24 inches. So that's how long I need to roll out that white fondant. So I'm going to knead that together. It's been sitting for a little while, and it's so much easier to work with. I have videos talking about how to get marshmallow fondant to the right consistency. That will be linked in the description. So let's sprinkle down some cornstarch, roll it out a little wide first before I roll it long. And I just want to use a fondant smoother to smooth out any air bubbles in the fondant. Now I want to make sure that this is long enough, and it is, and I'm just cutting a straight edge on the bottom, and it has to be 4 inches tall. So I'm holding the 4 along that straight edge, and I'm using my pizza cutter to make a dotted line that I'm going to connect and cut. So now I know that entire strip is 4 inches tall. And I'm just getting my spatula under there, making sure it's not sticking to the countertop. Cut a straight edge on one side and straighten it with my rulers. Now I got the cake out of the fridge. I'm getting a little bit of piping gel on a paintbrush, and I'm painting those 3 sides, so the 2 short sides and the 1 long side. And then I want to roll that up from one end, and I want to make sure the bottom part is all even. Start on one end, and I'm going to press this against the cake and wrap it around. Make sure no air bubbles form behind there. Good. Then I'm taking some scissors and just cutting off the excess. Nice, and there's a little air bubble there, so let me pull the fondant out and push that air bubble out. Use my fondant smoother to smooth this out. And now I want to sharpen the corners using my weird pinch technique. Do not squeeze the fondant too hard. You're going to put fingerprints in it. What I'm doing, I'm dragging my fingers close together and trying to get a sharper edge on these corners here, right? So I'm not squeezing very hard. I'm just pulling that fondant together. At the bottom, I'm kind of pushing it together with my thumbs. So I'm just trying to get a sharper edge on here. If you push too hard, you're going to put fingerprints in the fondant and it is not going to look good. So I'm taking my fondant smoother and smoothing it out on either side. And again, doing the same thing, trying to get a sharp corner. This is my weird pinch technique. It's covered in my video on how I cover cakes with marshmallow fondant, and I will link that in the description. So you can see that you can kind of see I pinched a little too hard there, so I'm trying to smooth it out with my fondant smoother. Good, now I'm taking a piece of fondant and I'm smoothing the fondant with the fondant, and I'm pressing that down on the top to make sure it is level with the cake. You don't want that fondant to stick up over the top of the cake. Now I can see another little air bubble formed on the side here, so I'm taking my needle tool and pulling the fondant out so I can get rid of that air bubble. Now I want to make the page line, so I have this little wheel cutter, and I'm just trying to make horizontal lines across all 3 sections of this white fondant. So I'm trying to keep it pretty even. I mean, they're not going to be perfect going across the whole time. I mean, it would take a while to make sure that they are perfectly straight and equidistant, if you will, but just having these horizontal lines in here does give the effect of pages in a book. And that looks good. Let's put that back in the fridge. Then I got it out of the fridge. I want to measure how long and wide the cover has to be. So it needs to stick out about a 1/2 inch over the edge. So it needs to be like 11.5 by 10.5 inches. I'll put that back in the fridge. And now I'm kneading this fondant. It sat with the Tylose. Look how smooth it is now. So I gave that Tylose powder time to work, and the fondant's so much easier to work with. Sprinkle down some cornstarch and let's roll this out, making sure it is at least 10.5 by 11.5 inches wide. Good, smooth it out with my fondant smoother. I'm cutting a straight edge on the bottom, and it has to be 10.5 inches on one side. So again, I'm holding the 10.5 on that straight edge, and I'm making a dotted line with my pizza cutter. And then I have this L square, so I'm lining it up on that straight edge that I made, and I'm cutting it down the other edge. So that way I have a perfect 90-degree angle cut. And then it has to be 11.5 inches on the other side, so I'm marking that dotted line there. Line the straight edge up with that side that I just cut, and I line that top long piece against that one dotted line that I made. And I'm doing the same thing on the other side, lining it up with that dotted line to cut a perfectly square piece. And then just straightening the edges with my ruler. I got my cake out of the refrigerator, and I'm getting a little piping gel just on the side and a little bit on the top. I don't want to have piping gel all on the top of the cake. It'll be easier to move that top piece around if it's not glued down. And let's lift that fondant and stick it up on the book. And this can get a little tricky. So I have that bottom edge down. I'm just smoothing it down. Now, those pages are sticking up a little too far over the top of the cake. So I'm just taking my fingers and pushing it down so it's level with the top of the cake and it doesn't make a mark in that black fondant. Good. Taking my fondant smoother and just starting to smooth out the top and the sides. And using my weird little pinch technique to get a sharper edge on that binder, whatever, you know what I mean. Now, this is sticking out a little too far, so I need to trim it a little bit, but I need a straight line. So I'm holding that ruler there. Don't move the ruler, just making a line in here with my needle tool so I have a line to cut. When you're cutting this excess off with the scissors, make sure you line the scissors up perfectly. You don't want a jagged edge. Cut very carefully. Now the corners are hanging down, so what I like to do, get a piece of wax paper and fold it in half. Fold it in half again, and in half one more time, and stick that underneath. So you see why I don't glue that down, so I can do something like this and get some pieces under here. And doing the same thing on the other corner. That way the corners will not droop. Now this is sticking out a little too far on the sides too, so I'm doing the same thing. I want to make this line, and this is a little challenging here. I don't want that ruler to move. Make sure that I'm holding it in place and making that line with my needle tool. And I want to continue that line going down the side as well, because there was too much, a little bit too much hanging off the side. So I measured, but sometimes the measurements are a little off, and this is just what you have to do to make sure that it fits. So now I'm using my X-Acto knife and cutting off that excess because I can't use scissors down that side part. And now I'm going to use the scissors to cut the rest off. And just smoothing out those cuts with my fingers and removing any excess cornstarch with a dry paintbrush. And again, I'm just refining that top edge there, and I'm taking my fingers and just smoothing out those fondant cuts that I made, making sure the fondant isn't jagged, and that looks good. Let's put that back in the fridge. Now I want to roll out the fondant for the bottom part of the cover. You could see about how thick it is, and I want to take my fondant smoother and just smooth that out. Get my cake out of the fridge, and now this is, you can see how it's like curving out a little bit. I'm taking my rulers and I'm pushing them in so I can get that to be straight, right? Because I don't want it to have a curve like books are straight, right? Do you see how I took the curve out when I did that? It looks so much better. So again, on this long side, I don't want to press too hard on the black fondant because I don't want to make a mark, but that way you see the edges are a lot more sharp on the bottom. Now I'm measuring how far that black fondant is sticking out on the sides, and I think it was like almost a ½ inch. So I have this ribbon cutter here and making sure I have that the perfect size, and I do. And I'm just cutting 3 little strips here. And after I cut anything out of fondant, I like to take my fingers and smooth my cuts, and then take my rulers and just straighten these out. And now I'm getting a little bit of piping gel down. I'm going to do the long edge first. And just sticking that down. You can see how it's sticking out a little bit. It's curving out. So I'm cutting off the excess fondant there. And then I want to take my ruler and I'm pressing it in to straighten that line. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the one side. And I'm going to lay this fondant and I'm going to let it cross over that bottom piece. And again, you can see how that fondant is sticking out on the side. So I'm pressing it in with my ruler to make it flush with that back piece. And then I want to cut it on an angle where it meets in the corner and get a little bit of piping gel underneath and press that together. And again, just refining that, making sure that it's straight. And let's do the same thing on the other side. Get some piping gel down, get that piece down, and then I'm going to use my ruler to press it so it's flush with that back piece. And take my X-Acto knife, cut it on an angle, remove the excess fondant, get a little bit of piping gel underneath those pieces, and glue them down. All right, you want to make sure that bottom cover is perfectly straight. So I'm just taking my ruler and I'm pushing it in, making sure it's not like curving out. And then you see how I'm making the rulers meet at the corner and just making sure, maybe in a little extra with it, but it just makes it look so much better. And let's put that back in the fridge. So now I'm getting it out of the fridge and I just want to do the binding detail. I can remove these wax paper pieces because now that has solidified in the fridge overnight. I rolled out black fondant pretty thin and I'm cutting 4 little strips here. Smoothing my cuts, I'm cutting a straight edge on the bottom of all 4 of them, straightening them out like I always do and measuring. This needs to be about 4 inches tall. So I'm holding the 4 down at that straight edge and I'm just cutting all of these 4 inches tall. And then I'm getting a little bit of shortening on the back, just a little tiny bit in the middle in each of them. So shortening is very forgiving. I can stick them on the cake and then I can move them around because they're not going to be perfect in the exact spot to start. So I'm measuring and I'm making sure like they're sticking out on and evenly on both sides. So you see how I can peel it off easily because I have the shortening on it. And then once I get them in the right place, I'm going to get a little bit of water behind them to stick them to the cake. And then I'm just taking a wet paper towel and cleaning up the cake board. And then I want to shine it up and get rid of that cornstarch. So I'm dipping a paintbrush in some shortening and just wiping it on there to get rid of the ugly marks that the cornstarch makes. And just to shine it up a little bit, it deepens the color and it makes it look so much better. And I'm making sure that I get the top part, the bottom section, in the sides, anywhere that I can see cornstarch. I just want to basically cover the whole thing. So I'm doing a light coat. You don't want too much shortening. Then I'm taking a dry, clean paper towel and just wiping the excess off. And there is your awesome book cake. So there you go. There's my little crazy method of how to make a book cake. And I know with my little way of making it like even on the sides by pushing it in with that yardstick, hey, you know what? The name of the game with cake decorating is you find what works for you and you stick with that. So if you have a different method, feel free to use that, but I just am showing you what works for me. Now the yardstick is going to be linked in the description, and what I do, I buy the yardstick, it's 36 inches, and I cut it in half. That way I have two really long rulers that I can use. So this is just a plain book, and you can feel free to decorate it however you would like. I will show you the finished product over here, and this has a graduation cap on it, and I have a video showing you how I make a graduation cap, and I will link that in the description. And also those they're gold, the gold lettering, the congrats graduate. I have a video showing you how I use the tappets, and I will link that below as well. And the diploma, I just rolled out some fondant, cut it to the right width, and then rolled it up and wrapped it in a little fondant bow. So I think that's it. What new techniques did you learn in this video? I would love to know. Leave them in the comments below. And just a reminder, I have my favorite numbers PDF and my pound cake recipe book that's available for you guys. Those are linked in the description. Please like this video if you liked it, and if you're enjoying my tutorials, I would be so grateful if you could buy me a coffee. My link is pinned in the comments below. And you can keep in touch on socials and check out my website. Everything's listed in the description. And if you want to stick around, you can watch this video next. And hit subscribe and the bell if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys. And remember, it's cake, have fun. I will see you on the next one. Bye.